Hello, followers of the 4-Year Journey. This is Bob Lucas here in New York City, coming to you from Station 3 NYC. This is October 10th, 2024, and this is yet another installment in the 4-Year Journey series. First of all, I just want to say I hope you've all been well. It's been a while since I recorded a video, almost 4 months, probably the longest gap between videos. And a lot has happened and a lot hasn't happened in that period. I just really haven't seen a need to come out with a new video since that last one, since the market has mostly trended sideways in this consolidating range. So there just hasn't really been much in terms of a change in the outlook for Bitcoin in that period. And that's the reason for kind of this extended delay. But there's a lot to talk about today. And the main topic I have here is this question of no bull. So do we have a bull market or not? Are we going to make all-time highs? I sense there is now some fear creeping into the market. The ETF has been out for quite some time now. We've also had the halving come and go. And some of these narratives that we all kind of got behind haven't panned out just yet. And here we are in October of 24 with the stock market making all-time highs seemingly every week, even gold making big all-time highs, and Bitcoin continues to languish, and altcoins are pretty much dying a slow death. The only thing out there that's really working is the really speculative meme coins. So there's a lot of sort of kind of fear out there and negative sentiment that's developed. And I just think that's kind of normal. We had a pretty substantial move in the first period or the first half of this 4-year cycle. And we're close to the all-time highs from the prior cycle still. So today I want to talk about this idea that is there a bull market or not, and then we want to talk about the fact that 8 months consolidation is actually pretty bullish, that the timing is right in the 4-year cycle, sentiment is right, it's been reset, fundamentals, macro, I think they all look right. The question that many have is this too obvious? And I don't think it is. And then I'm going to talk about this being right now, right here, the most bullish period in this 4-year cycle that's coming directly ahead. So with that, let's get into the video, and just essentially I'm just going to sort of just free talk my way through this video and just put out some random thoughts on kind of where we stand in this cycle, how we should be approaching this, and how we should be thinking about this overall. As always, let's start with the monthly chart of Bitcoin right here, where we're now sitting since the lows of the last cycle back in November 22, 23 months in. So just shy of a 24-month or 2-year anniversary of this cycle, which is exactly the midpoint of the cycle when measured from one cycle low to the next cycle low that's due around the November-December timeframe of 2026. So right here, sitting 23 months into a cycle, there is quite a bit of fear that's sort of crept into this market after what was a very bullish, very frothy period from the leaking of the ETF approval back in September, October of 23, all the way to the peak of the March 2024 high. I guess the biggest fear everybody seems to probably have is the fact that Bitcoin made the last all-time high back in March, 7 months ago. And for 7 months, we've been forming these lower highs on the monthly, and also to some extent a lower low structure here as the market consolidates over time into this 2-year anniversary mark. That is, I guess, creating some fear because, as usual, a lot of people entered the market way too late, waiting for confirmation, and then being locked out when the market went on this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7-month move, not giving many people an opportunity to buy as they were looking to buy on a dip, which never really eventuated. So I think, as usual, people get in late, their average price is a lot higher, and then They probably also rolled into a bunch of altcoins in this later period that are now down 50, 60, 70%. And before you know it, we're what, almost 2 years into a cycle that is still up around 3x off the lows. And some people, or a lot of people, are feeling as if they've actually haven't extracted any sort of value out of this cycle, or in many cases have actually lost money over this period when you look at altcoin performance and so on, or have used leverage, of course, at the wrong time and so on. But this, to me, is quite normal from a cycle structure perspective. We had a very, very strong initial phase of this cycle, and in fact a lot stronger than we've seen historically in any other cycle. During this period up to the peak in March, we didn't see a typical 30% decline at any given point. The biggest declines that we had were mostly time-based and were only around about 20% from peak to trough before making a new high. That threw a lot of people off. That made it difficult for people to get in, and were caught offside. But essentially, this market has been super bullish and super powerful all the way up to the March 24 highs. And if I'm looking at this just purely from a price and chart perspective, the only way I interpret this really is that we've just had to consolidate and completely reset sentiment in order to prepare for the next phase of this 4-year cycle. But sitting here 23 months, just around 20% or so off the all-time highs and off the last 4-year cycle high back in 2021, this to me feels more primed for the next phase of the 4-year cycle than anything else. Also, one interesting note, and I've covered this in prior videos, we're sitting, like I said, 23 months from the last cycle low, but interestingly enough, from the cycle low in December of 2018 to the first point where it made a new high, it took 23 months to get to the prior 4-year cycle high to exceed that before going on, of course, and pushing the boundaries and pushing the all-time highs. 23 months to get to that point in the cycle. Before that as well, it also took, I believe, 23 months. It actually took around 25 months just to pierce the highs that were set in the prior 4-year cycle. And the same is true for the cycle before that, which took, I think, around 22 months, if I'm not mistaken, to make and push to all-time highs. This cycle did that in just 16 months, much sooner. And I think a lot of that has probably to do with the ETF news, which really was a surprise for the market overall when that came out. And that forced buyers in earlier in the cycle than normal, pushing Bitcoin up to an all-time high, exceeding the prior cycle within just 16 months. That, though, in turn, I believe has created this dynamic where we now have to rotate a lot of coins. A lot of whales, a lot of old-timers are unlocking or even trapped longs from the prior cycle that got in late here, have had the opportunity to exit and rotate, while institutional players, larger account players, have been accumulating those coins in this period. It's just a matter of time more than anything else. And this period right here that we're seeing is a process where we end up erasing all that bullish sentiment that brought us from the lows of the last 4-year cycle up to the highs, to new all-time highs, allowing a complete separation from one phase of the cycle to this phase of the cycle that's sort of a mid-cycle decline, so, to call it that. Again, a cycle on this time frame is measured over 4 years. The midpoint of a cycle is typically, or is the half cycle point, and we typically see some weakness into that, and this is exactly what we're seeing. So you can almost consider this as like a 2-year cycle coming in now towards, if I take this candle right here. Sorry, a little sloppy right there. And we look at this from a mid-cycle point, then this becomes a 24-month cycle or a 2-year cycle. All cycles are intertwined. I just don't cover all those time frames. But essentially, you have a cycle within the cycle, for example. And I believe here what's happening is we're coming towards the end of this sort of first half of the cycle in preparation for the next phase of the cycle. So before I get into the path, the projected path, or where Bitcoin could be heading going forward from this point, I like to always sort of highlight where this analysis could be wrong and what the alternative might look like. And there's always a possibility that that Bitcoin's topped, that Bitcoin has already shown us a high for the cycle. I talked about the possibility of a big left translated cycle many times over the years. And there is still a possibility, although I believe it is pretty low of a possibility. But there's always a possibility that Bitcoin spent the first 16 months running up to exceed the prior highs and is now in a declining phase for the remainder of this cycle all the way into 2026. I know most of you are going to be like, that's just crazy, that's ridiculous. And I don't really think it has a highly probable possibility of being what's going on here, but it's something that is a possibility. Simple as that. There's no way to deny it. Stocks are at all-time highs. Gold is at all-time high. Bitcoin has had an ETF behind it, and yet it still hasn't, in 6-7 months, been able to push through or continue that trend. If the stock market, for example, were heading into some recessionary-based bear market, that could also weigh on this. So this is not me trying to create some FUD. I'm just pointing out the fact that in investing, there's always an alternative. There's always a worst case. And to not acknowledge that, I think, is just being mostly just ignorant of possibilities. And again, that's why the goal of this series really has been about getting us in on a 4-year cycle early to be able to, at least if a situation like that were to unfold, to still be able to walk out of it in the future having profited or done well and not lost a lot of capital. That's really the goal of the series. So by getting in this time around, again, around the 17,000 level, cushions us from the absolute worst case possibility. So for example, a drop, maybe a final thrust in a distribution kind of pattern, maybe to double top once more, maybe make a slight high. It doesn't really matter how it works out. And then kind of a process. And again, it can come in many different flavors, but this type of process all the way down to the next 4-year cycle low before moving and breaking all-time highs again. I know this breaks power laws and it breaks stock to flows and all these other models out there. And that's why I'm not saying this is even a remotely preferred option for where Bitcoin could be heading, but it's something that is definitely not a zero probability. And how you'd play something like that, well, it'd be difficult. that's a fact. It'd be difficult to play, and we may have to hodl through something like this if it were to occur. If we were to get a move like this where, let's say we test the lower $50,000 range one more time, and then we make one big surge above 70, maybe 70 to 75, at least we would be able to probably draw a line around this 50,000 level, which would be a place where if we were to go up and make a high and then the market, say, in the first quarter of 2025 or second quarter of 2025 revisits this lower level, it has no business doing that if it breaks this consolidating pattern and gets back above the 70,000 and beyond. If it gets back above there and then rolls back over and then takes out, say, the 50,000 level, even below that, even above that, to be honest with you, but if it were to take that out, that would be a major, major red flag in the future if that were to occur. and I'd probably be looking to unwind or protect some of the account on that scenario. So I want to spend 3 minutes covering that, but really what I want to cover is a more bullish view, a more positive view, one that's rooted in essentially what Bitcoin has done since inception, the cycles that it's followed, the trajectory that it's followed. When you zoom out, right, it's basically been one move from the lows on this path with this oscillation here in the cycles to a peak. The peaks are obviously periods in the cycle where the speculation, the mania goes to an extreme, and we top out, and then we go through a one-year bear market period. And we've done that consistently now 3 times before this, and so far in this 4-year cycle, I see nothing that has changed that trajectory, nothing in the profile or the structure that tells me that this cycle is any different to the last cycles. So therefore, I think from a probability perspective, following the pattern that Bitcoin has given us over time, also taking into account that we still have massive inflows into Bitcoin, mostly institutional players. No new retail has come in. I think it's all the same crypto folks that are still in this market. But who's buying all this selling? The German government has sold. FTX has imploded. There's been other big sellers as well. The US government, for example. Big sellers in the market. I'm talking billions of dollars. Yet those coins are being absorbed and prices down 20% from the highs or so, 25%. It's held up well. The ETF is still there. It's going to be pushed through the independent advisor channels. And so the timing is there. The macro, the fundamentals are there. We, of course, had the halving some months back as well. But more importantly, I think what I'm most excited about is the fact that the 3rd year of each of these 4-year cycles is where the magic happens. It's the first year that surprises everybody, that makes up a lot of ground. The 2nd year seems like, as we've seen in the past, seems like it stalls because it consolidates that first year of gains. 2nd year consolidates, and the 3rd year is the mania year. And right now, beginning next month, we have the mania year that is on deck. So for that reason, when I look at this 8-month consolidation, sitting at the 10-month moving average, a rising 10-month moving average, with all those factors in play, my only conclusion here is that there's a very high probability that within the next 90 days, and there's a reason why I say 90 days and not immediately, but within the next 90 days, I believe we're going to break out of this consolidating range. We're going to break to the upside. And once we do that, I don't think Bitcoin's going to look back. I think we're going to go in a period to the highs of the cycle that may only see 1 or 2 red monthly candles and mostly green candles. Now, from a price target perspective, everyone keeps asking, what's your target? What's your target? I don't have a target. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, right? I don't want to talk super cycle. I don't want to talk diminishing returns. All of those are open. All of those are options. A massive, massive mania blow-off move, which involves institutional and so on, could see Bitcoin up to some pretty crazy numbers, 5, 6, 7x multiples from here even. At the same time, there is a diminishing returns, right? Each cycle is not making as big a high as the prior cycle. As the market cap grows, it becomes a lot more difficult, okay? So going up to the hundreds, somewhere between 120 and 180 also seems very reasonable. Again, the point mostly is, though, that we're focusing on time and sentiment. So we're looking for a move up in the range where prior cycles have peaked, which have actually been very consistent at around month 35 since the last low. Month 35 from the November 2022 low gets you to October of 2025. And that basically gives us another 12 months to a expected or projected peak. Now, that's also not in stone. That could come 3, 4, 5 months earlier. We could get 5, 6 straight months up to a peak without looking back, and that could be it. It can come in many different flavors, is my point. But mostly the point I'm making here is that at some point, probably by the summer to the end of the 2025 period, we're looking for Bitcoin to begin from this base and leave this base right where the all-time highs from the last cycle peaked, and begin that final mania extension. And as it pushes through all-time highs one more time, I don't think it's going to look back. I think the sellers will be completely exhausted, and sentiment will quickly turn bullish. Institutional money will flow very quickly, and once Bitcoin is making all-time highs again, the media will get picked up, and then we're going to get, I think, a lot of retail participation, not just traditional crypto retail that we've seen in prior cycles, but kind of the boomer retail as well in retirement accounts and those big Schwab accounts, for example. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation into Bitcoin, but only once Bitcoin makes a push to all-time highs again and beyond. So that's what I think is directly ahead of us. I don't, again, see any reason why that should change, even though I've pointed out kind of the bear case scenario. If I had to guess, I think it's 85-15, it's 90-10. It doesn't really matter. The point is that I'm positioned for it. The model portfolio is certainly positioned for it. There is no upside price target. We're looking mostly for a big extension into the six-figure range for Bitcoin over a period in the 2025 year where Bitcoin just doesn't look back. And as we saw right here from September to March, it can cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time. And during this phase right here, we saw a 200% move in the phase back in December 2020. Of course, it was 500%, again, diminishing returns perhaps, but anything is possible, and it only takes 5 or 6 good months of solid green candles before Bitcoin, before you know it, is up into that, again, that mid 150, 100 to 200,000 range pretty quickly. And I believe that's what's ahead of us here in the coming months. What about the next 2 months or so? And that's where it gets a little murky. There's a lot of factors still at play right now. So I don't normally cover a weekly chart on this on these video series, but I want to try and illustrate a point of what we're seeing here on the weekly time frame. These blue candles represent the weekly cycles, and those are around 6 months apart generally. The last big weekly cycle occurred back in July, and since then we've actually exceeded to the downside below that and formed what's called a failed cycle. Right now we're showing a week 4 high of a 26-week average cycle. They do come sooner, but the point I'm trying to make here is these red candles are in shorter cycles on a 60-day time frame, and they've been forming lower highs all the way through. So it's certainly seeing this declining structure, and the lows for each cycle have mostly been forming lower. Right now, as you can see, the structure is still in place. It hasn't changed. So in the intermediate time frame between these 26-week cycles, we are seeing lower highs and lower lows. And it would be a little unusual for Bitcoin, and I've been saying this for some time on my private service, a little unusual for Bitcoin to push through and make an all-time high, given that the last weekly cycle occurred in July and has already formed in a failed state. Now, we have a couple of interesting items coming up on the calendar, and this is by no means in any way a political statement, but it looks as if Trump and the GOP have really been pushing. They obviously have been pushing crypto and Bitcoin to the point where a lot of the community has seemed have hinged kind of their hopes on Trump being elected. Personally, not a fan of that view. I don't like my government or the government being involved. I think there's plenty of time for very favorable regulation in the future, but I feel that now is not the time for that. But regardless, the market is certainly going to respond very, very favorably to a election win by the GOP, purely because of their stance on crypto. But that election is not coming up until the November 4th period. Coincidentally, the next 60-day cycle low is due around that week as well. And when you look at the cycle count on the weekly time frame, that gets you to around 18 weeks from the last big weekly cycle low. So it's my thinking, at least at this point, that this market is either going to just trend sideways into that period, November, and from that point forward, possibly form a weekly cycle low. So this would become an 18-week cycle low and end. The up phase of a 4-year cycle, this move to the upside, cannot happen, or in theory, from cycle theory, should not happen until a weekly cycle low occurs, because these cycles are intertwined. So for me, I think we still have around 3 to 4 weeks of some trending, sideways trending action. It's looking right now as if it wants to maybe revisit some support down in the mid-$50,000 level. But I'd be highly surprised if this market can push into the 70s before the election here in the US. Ultimately, though, again, not to make this political in any way, I don't think it matters one bit. I don't think it matters who wins. Bitcoin has really existed throughout a period that governments have been pretty, especially in the US, have been very hostile towards it. Yet Bitcoin continues to make all-time highs within each cycle, and as you can see from the 4-year cycle paths, continues to ignore that. And if anything, of course, Bitcoin is an anti-government movement. So there is an argument to be made that the more bullish path is not a GOP win, that Bitcoin is still attacked and hardened and is the anti kind of government money and not something embraced and accumulated by governments. Why we would want the government to accumulate Bitcoin is beyond me personally. Anyway, I don't want to cover it too much because I know many of you are probably going to go crazy in the comments because you can't keep away from political commentary. So that's not political commentary. It's really more about how a market may respond here coming up. So a GOP loss may even result in a sharper decline, for example, temporarily before something like this were to happen. The point that I'm really making here is that I don't think we're going to see a lot of clarity and this move higher in Bitcoin until the November election. Once that concludes, I have a sneaky suspicion that this market's going to respond favorably in either result, with maybe a 1 or 2 week bigger volatility event depending on who wins that election. So keep that in mind here. My views that I've been sharing on this video about the 4-year cycle ahead is mostly to say that this consolidating period is soon coming to an end, that this 8 to 9 month consolidation that we're in is actually very bullish. It's acted as a resetting period, and that is the kind of foundation that you need to launch the next phase and the mania phase of a 4-year cycle. So wanted to keep it relatively short today because I don't want to complicate much of the analysis. The analysis really hasn't changed throughout this 4-year cycle. It's behaving like other 4-year cycles have. I want to remind you of how important psychology, the role psychology plays in hodling. I know you're tempted all the time, especially when you see others posting big wins. It doesn't change cycle to cycle. In prior cycles, like in 17, it was ICOs and people posting massive gains in some really shit coin that was out there. And then there were NFTs, and then there were other coins and meme coins and so on. There's always something people are speculating on in this space. And it's our job here that are hodling to not waste our capital diverting it from something like Bitcoin that is showing a much surer path to a high, to a 4-year cycle high, to chase these short-term speculative gains. I know some people make a lot of money in that, but the fact is the majority of people end up just being liquidity, exit liquidity for these early degens, I guess, to cash out on. So don't be that liquidity for them. Bitcoin offers a very good reward. Okay, it's not, yes, I know it's not the 100x stuff that some of the altcoins and meme coins and so on can, if you get lucky, can provide. But from an investment standpoint, Bitcoin still offers massive gains by any metric. And don't forget one thing, none of those meme coins will continue rising. None of those altcoins will do well unless Bitcoin does well. That is almost a guarantee in crypto. Nothing will do well unless Bitcoin does well. But the reverse is not true. If Bitcoin does well, it doesn't guarantee everything else will do well. So this offers a surer path, with a good, sizable return potential still ahead of us. In following videos, if we can break out, of course, we'll look and start to think more about sentiment as it approaches higher levels. We're still well short of that. We still need to, of course, break out of this consolidating range, get to new highs, and then we can start entertaining the idea of where this market might be topping out. We're still a couple of videos at least short of that. So in the meantime, it's all about being invested, having that position, being locked in, hyper-focused on this, and in it for the next phase of the 4-year cycle. If you've been looking to add, if you've been thinking to add, of course you want to keep your position size reasonable, but like I think I said in the last video, this range is certainly a good spot to be adding, given what the potential lies ahead in this 4-year cycle. So wishing you all the very best. I'll get a video out probably before the end of the year in December. Hopefully at that point, the video will be about the breakout of this range. That would be nice. And we'll talk about what that cycle or what that breakout might look like. But until then, be well, and wishing you a great period. Thanks very much.